online now. We have about 650 registered. We won't get that many, but we'll leave it a few more minutes because people are continuing to log on. There are a couple of questions appearing in the Q&A already. So I'd direct my speakers to have a look at your Q&A function. And if you are able to answer, please do. And we'll get going in about 2 minutes, I think. That's okay. Thank you again for joining us. I'm Sean Kidney, CEO of the Climate Bonds Initiative. I'll be moderating in a few minutes. Okay, folks, let's get going. Today, we're here to talk about ASEAN green finance. We've just launched a report. Today is, in fact, the launch event for the ASEAN Green Finance State of the Market report from the Climate Bonds Initiative, supported by HSBC and the Asian Development Bank. We have with us on the call Cedric, who's our program manager for the ASEAN region at Climate Bonds Initiative, and I'm, of course, the CEO of the Climate Bonds Initiative, Sean Kidney. But we're also lucky to have Jonathan Drew, who's a managing director of sustainable finance at HSBC, the ASEAN's #1 underwriter in the league table for green and sustainable bonds by a country mile. We'll hear from him about his thoughts on the market and the outlook, which I'm sure will be of particular interest to people on the call in a minute. And we also have Kosintr Puongsophol, or Kunpok, from the Asian Development Bank, who's a financial sector specialist in the economic research and regional cooperation area, who will talk about how the Asian Development Bank is thinking about supporting this market going forward, and we'll have some other comments as well. This is part of a series of webinars that the Climate Bonds Initiative is hosting, focused on different regions around the world. We have, for example, every Thursday, a webinar on the European taxonomy. It'll be at 1500 Paris time this afternoon. But there are webinars on other days. We're not being quiet in these periods of lockdown. We are being very loud and noisy about making sure people understand what's been happening in the market, what's going on in the market, and also what's going to happen. We're in a global crisis. Some countries and regions are more affected than others. Some have been better prepared. We've got a lot to learn from how to make our societies more resilient in the faces of shocks like this shock, which has been a pandemic shock. The World Health Organization and the International Panel of Climate Change have been saying for many years that we can expect a century of shocks, including pandemics, on a regular basis. President Obama in the US made a landmark speech many years ago, 5 years ago, about this and the need to prepare. Some countries, especially in East Asia, have actually done a good job of preparing, so their resilience and their ability to respond has been better than, say, countries in the West. And now, where I am today in London, we have a bit of a runaway crisis because of a lack of preparation, a deepening of the health system to be able to respond. This is something we need to learn from. In what will be a century of much greater weather volatility as a result of climate change, we need to assume that shocks of one sort or another, much stronger typhoons in the Philippines, for example, are going to become the norm. and we need to prepare our societies accordingly, whether that's infrastructure hardening, coastal defence, deepening our health system that we can respond, or instituting social protection mechanisms. So when you have these outages, we're able to step in quickly and support, especially the poor and less resourced in society, because when it's a crisis, we're all in it together. If one part of society isn't able to cope, the rest will feel the impact of that. We have to be thinking together. So that's the learning from the crisis we're in now. And as we look at stimulating our economies to grow them again, we, like many people, will be saying we need to make sure we grow our economies in the right way. We need green stimulus, and we need measures that deepen the resilience for future shocks. This is not a one-off, folks, unfortunately. But today we're going to talk more focused on what's been happening in fixed income markets in ASEAN. I'd like Cedric, our ASEAN program manager, to kick us off with a little bit of a look at the report. On your screen at the moment, you'll see the cover. At the bottom, you will see a website address that'll appear at the end. And of course, if you go to our website, you'll be able to find the details. Download the report, do have a look. But Cedric, give us some highlights.
Thank you very much, Sean. Hello, everyone. So the green bond market and the green loan market, which we refer to as the green finance market, has grown very strongly in ASEAN in 2019. In 2018, $4.1 billion of green bonds were issued. In 2019, we saw twice that amount at 8.1 billion. That came through with 32 green bonds and loans from 20 issuers. This is a very significant growth that is exceeding the growth that we've seen on global markets, where $259 billion have been issued in 2019. The major markets are Singapore, which led the region with 6.2 billion, and then Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, and Malaysia. There were no issuance in the smaller markets. There were a few surprises. We were expecting more issuance, for example, from sovereigns, but only Indonesia came again with a sovereign sukuk at the beginning of the year. There was no other sovereign come with a green bond. The surprise was also that there was a good activity from non-financial corporates and financial corporates. We saw 12 debut issuers from non-financial corporates. Overall, the ASEAN green finance market is dominated by financial corporate with 29% and non-financial corporate with 27%. The other surprise was the importance of issuance in local ASEAN currencies, which represented 41% of the new issuance. This is very positive, and I'm sure Khun Pak will relate to that because ADB is a very strong advocate of increasing the local issuance in the corporate bond market in the region. In terms of sectors, 3 sectors dominate the green bond issuance, and this is similar to the global markets. The first one is buildings, which represented 34%, followed by energy, 33%, and transportation with 12%. The fourth sector being water. The average size of the new bonds being issued was relatively small in the area of 200 to 250 million US dollar. And the maturity of those loans was dominated by short-dated issues from 0 to 5 year for 48%, followed by the 5 to 10 year, which represented 24%, and is a demonstration that this market is maturing as issuers are able to come to the market with issues with longer tenors. So overall, we saw a very active market, which represents and demonstrates a lot of potential new issuance from various parts of the economy. And we believe that it sets the stage for a stronger market in the future once we have passed the current crisis we're in, which is a bit unfortunate, but will not, call the end of this market.
So I need to ask Khun Pok and Jonathan, this local currency development, which is fantastic news in terms of avoiding FX risk and developing a local market. This is a bit of a surprise, isn't it? We thought we'd have to see more hard currency issuance beforehand. Your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts, Sean, I'm not surprised to see it at all. I think we've seen a true mainstreaming and coming to the party of the ASEAN countries and their key players in the relevant economies. And they've very smartly looked to really use the flexibility of the green financial products to tap into, where the best market opportunities for them are, as you highlighted, whether it might be local currency because that's providing you with the FX hedge against perhaps the revenues of your business. That may be where the pools of liquidity that best understand your business are. So to me, it just emphasizes, the flexibility of the products and how this really is going mainstream. So issuers out there should really be thinking, this is creating the story. This is giving me better market access than if I just go in regular format. So shift the thinking about where you want to go, but the story that you need to be telling to put yourself in the pathway of capital that is increasingly aware of these sustainability issues and increasingly seeing value. And you guys at CBI have done some great research on how issuers generally are now really starting to see lower new issuance premiums when they go in green format. That evidences the institutional investor demand. So no, not surprised at all, Sean.
So the local currency issuance, local demand, or is there some international play in that, some international investors? Is it mainly the increasing demand from locals?
Well, I'd say you're seeing both. You're seeing a lot of, you're seeing the local portfolio managers now seeing the opportunities. In a sense, if the product isn't there to buy, they can't buy it. There's now that greater awareness of the value from both the buy side and the sell side of green format and the improved disclosure that results in. You've got drivers from regulators locally who are pushing their champions to get out there and to do this because they recognize they need to demonstrate how they are encouraging capital to play its role in supporting the transition to a sustainable future. Of course, in those markets, you've got a lot of what I would call local currency managed by sort of global brands, perhaps amongst the global insurance companies who will have strong domestic businesses across many of those markets. So they're holding very strong pools of capital. So you're getting good synergies there as those brands apply and drive that approach, and that sort of core ESG value proposition is being reflected in how those monies are applied across the currency spectrum.
So Khun Pok, this is very exciting development, right?
Yes, Sean. Actually, it's very good to hear from you and Cedric and Jonathan that we have seen a strong growth of the green bond market in ASEAN last year. And of course, this is remarkable. But coming back to your questions on the local currencies, of course, it's no surprise to us that many issuers are issuing green bonds in hard currencies. But because, this shows that the supply is there. There are many issuers who are keen to issue green bonds. But the problem is that how do we match the supply with the demand in local currency terms? Mm-hmm. Of course, it would be good if the issuers can, they are able to issue local currency bonds, especially for their investments in their local jurisdictions. And this is where ADB can come in to help the issuers issue green bonds, and also to match the issuers' green bonds with the demand of the green investments by the local institutional investors. And what we have seen in the last few years is quite clear that the policymakers, either the central banks or the securities commissions, are now coming up with a clear guidance that they would like to see more green bond or green finance developed in our region, in ASEAN. So hopefully, after this COVID-19 pandemic, when the bond market picks up, we will see more of the local green bond issue in local currencies.
I mean, clearly the work of the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum a couple of years ago in developing green bond guidelines that have been now taken up by countries in the region looks to have been quite influential, because we saw 200% growth in 2018, I mean, 2 years ago, and 100% growth last year in this market. So, well, at least there's a correlation, right?
Yes, actually, we have been working from ADB. We have been working with the ACMF to develop the green bond standards in 2017. And what we have seen is that after we have the clear guidance from the regulators, especially after the launch of the ASEAN green bond standards, we have seen remarkable growth in the green bonds in this region. You're correct. Thank you.
So last year, global growth in the market was 50%. ASEAN growth was 100%. If we can keep this up, ASEAN is going to become a very big chunk of the global market very quickly. Cedric.
I see a question on the chat. Someone is asking how much of dedicated green capital is there for ASEAN in local currency. As Jonathan said, there is more and more interest from foreign players to invest in local currency. I don't know how much there is of really local capital looking to invest in green, but I think the green bonds appeal to a broader audience, not just the green investors. I don't know if Jonathan or Kunpak would have a comment on that.
Yeah, Cedric, I don't have the number to answer the question explicitly, but I think in a sense, local currency or assets in whatever currency they may be, financial assets in whatever currency they may be denominated, have the same fundamentally the same investment challenge. And fundamentally, the ESG approach, the core story that putting those to work by investing in companies who are focused on delivering long-term value across all of their stakeholders, whether it's from employees to customers and suppliers and the markets in which the communities in which they operate in the global community. That's where there's long-term value. And I think there's now increasing data. We're seeing this from both index providers, research. There's a lot of increasing volume of research out there that's now showing that core investment proposition has real value. And to bring that into sort of 2020, we've already seen, or we're starting to see now quite interestingly, in the tragic circumstances that obviously 2020 have brought upon us, but tragically that proposition in a sense is being borne out, where we're seeing now outperformance of ESG strategies. And I've looked at research that our guys here at HSBC have done and others in the market have done, and it's material. I mean, it's obviously very sensitive to the sort of the dates, the start point and the end date, but we're talking material single digits or 3 to 8% type outperformance from those strategies. And of course, the green fixed income product is part of that.
In global terms, what we found when we speak to treasurers around including some treasurers in ASEAN, is that people are seeing a bit of price movement in hard currency, but people aren't doing it for that. That the decision to do a green bond or a green loan is usually tied to positioning with investors and with the general market. So it becomes a CEO board decision. And one of the interesting things you see in Europe is a correlation between a stock price bounce and green bond issuance. So when a non-financial corporate issues a green bond, their stock price goes up and it stays up. Investors would seem to be using the green bond issuance as a signal that that company is doing something to reduce risk of being impacted by policy transitions that everyone believes going to happen now, or they're doing something to mitigate future risks. So that's interesting to develop in the hard currency market. And you see another feature in the global market, which is in downturns in the past, green bonds have generally maintained their value relative to vanilla. Now this is gold dust, because if you're a defensive bond investor, and Larry King made his money by, as he says, not by giving people yield, but by ensuring they never lost their money. The bond markets have a fundamental defensive approach. If this is a product which can better hold its value because of tightened liquidity and other measures in a secondary market, then it has a lot of value. Now, that's the hard currency story. And we've seen an example of the hard currency story with BPI, which issued a Swiss franc bond out of the Philippines. And I believe they got a negative interest rate in the end. Is that right, Cedric?
They got a negative reoffer yield, and the coupon was 0%, yes. So it was quite a surprise to them to go out as far as the Swiss franc market and be able to issue a green bond. But they are good issuer, well recognized in the market as well. But not only them, we have seen a number of issues that have been very well received by the market. The BTS transaction comes to mind in Thailand, where the deal had to be upsized and the oversubscription was very large, 8 times oversubscribed, demonstrating that the local issuance in Thailand, in Thai baht, was able to attract a very strong interest. That's very encouraging. And earlier this year, the Bangkok Post reported that as many as 10 companies were preparing to issue green bonds. So I see a few questions on the chat asking what's the future for green bonds and which markets are going to dominate. I think all markets have a really strong card to play. And so some markets have a different tag. For example, in Malaysia, there is a very strong momentum behind Islamic formats with the sukuk being issued. Indonesia, after the sovereign, could go with SOEs or corporates to increase the size of the green bond market. And this could be a very interesting way of financing the growth in the country. Vietnam is also displaying some positive signs, even if it's a bit behind for now, but we've been participating, with Khun Pak in training the people in Hanoi as well, with the support of ADB to try to put in place the knowledge and increase the momentum of that market. So there is a lot to go for, and it's very encouraging. And once the crisis is over, I'm sure we'll see a strong growth.
Can I just pick up the oversubscription? You're saying a Thai local issuance 8 times. That was my question, really. And we saw an Iberdrola bond recently in Europe, 11.5 times oversubscribed in the middle of the crash, which is pretty extraordinary. What you're saying is we're also seeing that local currency. Now, that's an incredibly important message for our audiences. How often are you seeing this level of oversubscription? Or not necessarily 8 times, but strong levels of oversubscription in local currency issuance?
Well, for now, I mean, we see it at the global stage. A lot of issuance globally are oversubscribed, not only this latest one from Iberdrola, but in ASEAN, the government of Indonesia has been surprised to receive 39% more investors than the normal sukuk program just by issuing a green sukuk. And it's a demonstration that they are really able to reach to new types of investors that want to invest in green. So, I mean, for now, the evidence is a little bit patchy because there are not that many truly public bonds being issued. For example, in Singapore, there's a lot of loans being closed instead of bonds. So the evidence to demonstrate that there's a clear oversubscription pattern is still a little bit tentative. But this is a global story, so it should happen in Asia as well.
Before I leave the current situation, tell us a bit about maturities. And is there any difference in this market to the general market? What's happening? Because, of course, locking in your finance long-term right at the moment is a very exciting prospect.
Well, it's dominated by short-dated issuance up to 5 years, but there is a strong growth in the 5 to 10 year maturity. And we've seen some very long-dated bonds being issued. For example, the first mini hydro sukuk bond in Malaysia was 18 years in maturity. So it's a demonstration that with a solid project, issuers are really able to raise long-term capital. And this is good quality capital, generally speaking, because it comes from institutional investors that are concerned with long-term risks that climate change is posing to their portfolio. So the capital tends to stay with those bonds. It's not speculative capital that will go away quickly.
And I think, Sean, to Cedric's point there, I think the other thing we're seeing here is there's human behavior amongst treasurers who are responsible for putting these issuances out into the market. There really is no restriction around tenor, but we've got a lot of first time to market issuers in Asia because we're a faster growing market. If you do something different, you want to be very sure it's going to be successful. So you might tend to sort of do some of your shorter dated tranches in green format because you want to be really sure that that's going to have the positive outcome. If you're pushing the market, testing a bit more for the longer dated appetite, particularly in today's markets, then you've got some more execution risk as a treasurer. You want to manage that a little bit. So I think that's why we're seeing perhaps some more of the shorter dated up to 5 years going in the new format. But I don't think that reflects anything about the lack of appetite, or because to your point, this is about, green is about the issuer. It's not just about the issuance, and the impact is across across the curve. So I think what we're seeing there is just a little bit of a human behavioral point.
So before we finish this, highlights, key bonds. I've got to ask about one bond, sorry, which is AC Energy's Perpetual. I'm always bamboozled by perpetuals, but they've done a perpetual green bond. Jonathan, explain. How does this work?
Well, it's the concept that you are, there is a price. You have a robust business. You have a particularly long-dated, robust business when you're a core corporate that is invested across so many of those sort of pillars of industry in a market like the Philippines. You've got an energy business. You align it to green energy as energy for the future. And when you've got high volumes of capital chasing that little bit of extra yield, they're willing to say, okay, well, I don't mind if there isn't a contractual prepayment date on the paper. So that, in a sense, reflects the liquidity, and again goes back to the point that if you've got a great story and there's a great green element to it, and there's a great market to place your paper into, there are amazing things you can achieve.
Okay, Perpetual's fantastic.
Sean?
Sorry, Kunpok, yes.
Sorry, Sean. If I could go back to Cedric's points earlier about different kind of issuers from different markets. We have seen Malaysia been focusing on Sukuk, and Singapore has been dominated by REITs, while Thailand and the Philippines has been dominated by infrastructure companies and renewable companies. So I think this is another key areas where the regulators, policymakers, or the underwriters could see that different countries in ASEAN, we have different characteristics that are actually complementary to each other. So together with this CBI's report, I think it is important that all the stakeholders are working together to help to promote ASEAN green bond market as an asset class, which is to so as to attract international investors into this market. Thank you.
And tell us a little bit, Kunpok, about what you're doing at ADB about this. How are you leading this?
Right, thank you, Sean. At ADB, for everyone's interest, we are actually the secretariat of the ASEAN Plus 3 Bond Market Initiative. The ASEAN Plus 3, as you may know, ASEAN comprises of 10 ASEAN countries. The Plus 3 include Japan, Korea, and China. And they set up this ASEAN Plus 3 initiative, or the ABMI, to develop the local currency bond markets in 2003. So the objective of ABMI is to help countries develop local currency bond market. And actually, the green bond has been one of the key focus of this forum. So what happened last year is that the ASEAN Plus 3 finance ministers and central bank governors endorsed the ABMI roadmap. And one of the key focus is on to help member countries to develop the green local currency bond for infrastructure investments. And this is actually the next steps. Actually, we published a report to provide a general assessment in 2018. And now ADB, we are developing a new technical assistance program to help countries develop their green finance market. Over to you, Sean.
And how do people get access? We've got a slide here, another slide coming through. Do you?
Yes,
Sorry, yeah.
the previous slide, please. Under this regional TA program, we are hoping to help issuers issue green local currency bonds. And based on our discussion with many potential issuers, they are quite keen to issue green bonds. That's why I mentioned in my earlier remarks that we are likely to see more and more green bonds to be issued in local currencies. But of course, even though they are keen to issue green bonds, but they are not sure what kind of projects will be eligible under the relevant international standards, for example, the climate bond standards, as well as the ASEAN green bond standards. So ADB will provide technical expertise to help issuers to identify eligible green projects, and also to help with the structuring of the green bonds, as well as the post-issuance reporting as well. And also we will help regulators to address their local constraints in developing the green bond market. And actually we provide the annual update. We work closely with the policy makers in ASEAN Plus3, the Ministry of Finance, the central banks, the securities commissions, the stock exchanges, and also the bond market associations. These are our stakeholders. So we are hoping to work together with the regulators to develop the green finance to create more supply of green local currency bonds. And on the demand for green bonds, we are hoping to utilize the Asian Bonds Online portal. The Asian Bonds Online, or the ABO, is an internationally recognized information platform for local currency bond market in ASEAN Plus3. The URL is there on the screen. So as a next step, we will be creating a new section specifically on green finance on the Asian Bonds Online website. And we will draw on the information from each of the ASEAN Plus3 markets onto this website, so that we can promote and we can attract international institutional investors into ASEAN. And other than that, we will also explore the feasibility of developing the green bond index, as well as the green bond exchange traded funds. So this is something that we are hoping to do over the next 2 years, Sean.
So you're going to see a lot of activity to try and continue to push this market forward from ADB and other actors is the key point. We've got a very concrete, practical question that's appeared, Jonathan, about what the parameters are for issuance. Some of these questions are not going to be covered today, underwriting criteria and so on, but we've seen a lot of variety between deal size in the region, right? Small to large. Can you just give a couple of points? Deal size and any other considerations if people are going to phone you up and ask for a discussion about doing a deal?
Well, deal size, as we're talking green finance, and I think it's great that you're sort of capturing now the loan markets in what you're reporting on, Sean. And obviously, we've talked mostly around the bonds, and we've talked about bond principles and guidelines. The loan market associations globally and the Asia-Pac Loan Market Association has been very much at the forefront of this, of bringing to the fore green loan principles, sustainability-linked loan principles. So building those sort of guidelines to create these products, and developing them in a way, to come to your question, that the very small bilateral loan can now be a green loan, and that can be done efficiently. And the market is building up very, very quickly around that, right the way up to the corporate that's going for its much larger syndicated facility. So again, size is really about what are the needs of the party raising capital, what are the needs of the borrower or the issuer. We've generally seen it's really about, this is my plan, this is where the green is in that plan, this is the capital I need to support that, that defines the transaction size, the funding needs, then start to think about the currency and the markets that you want to go to raise that effectively. And as I say, so there really is there's no size constraint. We've seen huge deals and we've seen very small deals. We still do see a few where you've got issuers who, and this again is testament to the value story, issuers who perhaps don't need the capital today, but you want to use the product, want to use the label product as a really impactful communication tool about what they're actually doing, in a sense of perhaps building the war chest for those substantial future investments. So size in that sense is not an issue at all. It's really about what do you need, and then how do you get it?
Okay, so we had a question about how this flows down to small landholders. Let's be clear, bonds are not going to be used by a farmer. What counts is who's lending to a farmer or lending to a small business. So it's going to be banks or companies, or it can work for renewable energy companies, small, as Jonathan says. You can get relatively small loans out of this, but it's not going to be a very small entity that's going to have a direct benefit. What we're seeing, though, is the increased enthusiasm for green finance, partly as a result, or largely a result, of investors wanting to shift their portfolios to be more climate friendly, resilient for the future, addressing environmental issues, trickles down to more capital available for projects on the ground. So an access to capital issue is the key impact out of this. You won't necessarily see price differential, I don't think, in the region, although you might see it in hard currencies like with BPI, Cedric, but what we'll see is greater access. Is that right, Cedric?
Yes, and also very interestingly, different countries have adopted different strategies in terms of the development of their financial markets. For example, Malaysia is clearly helping local SOEs and corporates to issue in the local market in local currency in Islamic format. And there is also evidence of banks locally issuing green products beyond just loan and bonds, like green mortgages or green deposits. That's very encouraging. If you look at Singapore, by contrast, it's a financial hub that is building up to welcome foreign issuers. For example, we've seen the massive issuance of ICBC, the Chinese bank, that has come with a green bond and successfully raised in 4 different currencies. We've seen also Singaporean company go overseas to issue green bond in Australia. We mentioned in the Philippines, a Filipino bank going to the Swiss markets. So there is a bit of both. I think there's the ability to raise finance locally, but also go overseas and attract foreign players in the green bond market. And in Thailand, for example, the support of the Thai SEC is very strong to promote the local market as well. The certification has been going very strong there. There is some strong support in terms of subsidy as well. In the Philippines, the support is there as well. And we see major corporates look to raise green bonds. And what have I missed? I think that's about it for the region. In Vietnam, again, we will see more issuance in the future, I think.
Well, this, Sean, I think is where the commercial banks clearly have a huge role to play. And there are, as Cedric is referring to, there's already green retail lending out there, green mortgage programs. HSBC has a green mortgage program in Vietnam. And we'll see that across, being rolled out across other markets. We don't yet have green personal loans, but we certainly have green loans to small corporates. We have programmatized lending programs where we use external certification providers, and they align to green lending programs right the way through. And of course, again, to Cedric's point and your point, Sean, about how we're trying to create efficiency here, is by having the same principles and standards that you're applying to your lending activity as same standards to those when you go and raise capital. You're effectively enabling institutional capital to support the intermediary by buying its green bond, where the proceeds are then effectively on lend into that multitude of green lending activities. And it's not just medium-term bonds as well. We're seeing across on the whole liabilities side of the balance sheet now. We've done doing green CDs across the region. So we've had a couple of very successful 3 and 6 month HSBC issuances out there. We've got green deposit programs now in both, certainly in Singapore, also in India, and coming up soon in Hong Kong, green deposits for corporate customers. And it's cost-effective funding, and that's creating the right moves in terms of for a green commercial bank to then look at because of course all of that goes into the mixer when you then look at the overall cost of your cost of funds for your green lending activity. So it really truly is going mainstream, Sean.
So fantastic that we're seeing the innovation across different kinds of instruments now. I note your terms cost-effective funding. We've had a lot of questions about pricing on the Q&A. So what we're saying is, in hard currencies, we see strong secondary market performance. Green bonds are a premium, perhaps because of their experience in corrections of the market in the past. We don't see that appearing in this market yet because we haven't seen the upswing. We're waiting to see whether green bonds have a differential rate in the upswing compared to other bonds. It's an uncertainty, but we do know that people do report in some currencies price difference, but the margins are tight. It's very hard to see it in the data on primary. So you can't go into this saying, I'm doing this because I'm going to get a massive price difference. If you're doing that, you're probably following the wrong strategy. Of course, if you're going to get a deeper relationship with your bank by appealing to the green loan program, or pick up or you're going to be able to get access to some support, or you're going to get greater levels of subscription, there is a pretty reasonable chance you're going to extract a bit of price difference over time. I mean, if you get 4 times as many investors as you need, then you've got a chance to at least settle at the bottom of your pricing band. And we see that coming regularly. But I just want to stress, if you're only looking for doing green format for immediate short-term price, you might be disappointed. If you want to look at green format about deepening your relationship with your investors and a long-term relationship, which will then give you benefits around pricing and access to capital over time, then this is for you. Well, that's my line, Jonathan. Does that sound crazy?
No, I think you're just about right there, Sean, but I think, I wouldn't underestimate how markets are giving value for green businesses, sustainable businesses.
He's bullish, this guy. I love him. Go ahead, Jonathan. Tell us more, because everyone wants to hear this.
Sean, you and I sort of started doing this many years ago, and at that time, if I'd mentioned anything like to do with pricing with my syndicate colleagues in the room, they'd have chopped me off. They'd have taken the microphone away, and you can't talk about it. But your research is starting to show that at the margin, the markets are giving value, and credit markets are giving value for issuers and borrowers who are building sustainability into their businesses through whatever they might be doing as an entity, whether it's specific projects or whether it's driving risk out of their business through better governance, better stakeholder engagement. And that is proving itself to be a valid long-term core valuation proposition. So we are starting to see that shift, and markets are starting to work. And in a sense, the tragedy with the current situation around COVID is that if anybody thought sustainability issues, that's don't have to worry about them for the moment, and they won't cost us much, or it's going to cost us more to deal with it than it is to deal with it up front and deal with it when it happens. I don't think there'll be too many people making that argument today, and I think that sort of is creating and reinforcing, I think, where Cedric is going, that we've got that foundation through 2019, so we sort of proved the concepts, and now in a sense I think that we've got that real unfortunate hard learning experience, and I think we'll see elements of that captured, and that will drive further developments. And I think particularly in the world of financial, if you're a financial institution, you have to understand today that society and your regulators and your stakeholders expect you to be delivering beyond just your short-term financial returns. So it's here, it's real.
I would say also that at the beginning of 2019, we were hearing a lot of treasurers or people responsible for bond issuance say that green bonds is costly, it requires a lot of effort, a lot needs to be done and there's no price benefit. But over the second half of the year, we started to see people focus on getting ready for, the regulation is already in place, and regulators have done a tremendous job in finding the right format for their own market and getting the level of support that is needed to support companies that really want to jump in. And I think it's very encouraging. And from the recent weeks, even though we are in the middle of this crisis, I personally get a lot of questions and requests from many different sections of the ecosystem, from regulators, from verifiers, from issuers. So my sense, and I don't know if Jonathan is able to confirm that, but my sense is that people are getting ready for whenever the market reopens again. And this should see the growth to continue, I think.
Yeah, well, I don't know whether you're, sorry.
Jonathan, go ahead after you.
No, I was going to say, I don't know whether we have the technology, Sean, but if we could do an online poll of all of the 2019 ASEAN issuers and say how many of them today who may have had exactly those concerns that Cedric outlined, or what's it going to cost me, will I get any of the benefit? If you ask them now, post doing their deal, how many of them would say, or if you said, put your hands up if you regret doing that green bond, I'd be pretty certain you won't get a single hand going up. And they'll have seen benefits not just in the pricing, and those may have been marginal, but across a whole other suite of areas, whether it's external stakeholder engagement to internal staff and employee engagement around the theme.
So we're going to segue into the future here, but clearly, we've done an investor survey we'll be publishing in a couple of weeks, which will pick up some of those comments. So do watch out for our webinar on the topic. But I just want to alert everyone, get the recording after this, listen to what HSBC's Guru of Green said in the last 5 minutes, because those comments about pricing are gold dust. You've got to listen to that again and again and again, because Jonathan has captured that. So remember, listen to the webinar. The Guru of Green has spoken. We'll come back next year, Jonathan, and see where you're going. Going forward, you've started talking about your forecast. Kunpok, go ahead.
Sean, if I could add to Jonathan and Cedric's comments, from ADB's point of view, 2 years ago, we had meetings with potential green bond issuers. And the first question that we got from them was that, what do I get, from issuing green bonds?
Yeah.
But the kind of questions that we receive nowadays is that, what do I have to do to issue green bonds? So the questions have been changed quite significantly during the last year. And that's why hopefully we will see more the issuers, especially new issuers, coming to the market this year, next year. And I think this will be a good timing for regulators and for the industry to develop the local demand for green bonds, because especially in ASEAN, as you may know, we have a few deals that were oversubscribed, as Cedric mentioned, but there could be more potential demands. Investors are still actually competing for yield, are still hunting for yield. They still haven't taken into account the ESG components into their investment criteria. So hopefully, in the next 2 years, we will see more and more of the demand for the local currency bonds, especially from insurance companies, with of course, the longer tenors of bonds that will likely come to the market, and also especially from the mutual fund as well. Thank you. Over to you, Sean.
I would like to answer a question as well. I see Swaroop asking, are you seeing momentum in other areas of ESG beyond green as well? And we are indeed, a section of our report is focusing on ESG and sustainability linked bonds. So this is gaining also some traction, but I would say the growth, although it exists, is not as strong as the green bond market. The benefit of the green bond market is to be really focusing on green assets and green infrastructure. And through the taxonomy that CBI has developed, this is really based on scientific evidence of what is green. So it's much more transparent to select green assets. But obviously there is a room for also social bonds or sustainability bonds. We see some evidence of that. There are some standards that are already in place at the ASEAN level, building on the ones that have been developed globally. I don't know if Jonathan, you have something to say on the sustainability side, because I'm sure you're getting a lot of requests on that.
Yeah, well, you picked up the question just before I did, Cedric. Look, it's fascinating, and this has very much come from the loan market. Sustainability linkage has come from the loan market, and the principles, sustainability linked loan principles, are the APLMA, LMA, and LSTA out of New York, published in March of 2019. Now, the scorebook for global SLLs for 2019 was nearly 150 billion. So in year one, sustainability linked loans have grown to nearly half of the overall, what we might call sustainable bonds markets. I know you guys don't really track the social bond numbers as well, but broadly half. Extraordinary growth. Now, I think it's come from the loan market because there are some reasons for that. Because I think perhaps, well, firstly, there's a closer relationship probably between the capital provider and the user, the lender and the borrower, and the willingness of the borrower and ability of the borrower the lender in the pricing to offer incentives to borrowers. And of course, you won't find a borrower anywhere who isn't interested in receiving the incentive of a reduced margin, which is typically the sustainability performance target that underlies sustainability linked loans, if they can achieve those ambitious KPIs. So huge growth this year. And in fact, it's really swamped the green loan market, actually. In some senses, maybe cannibalized it, because green loans have not grown so nearly so quickly. Will it translate into the bond market? And of course, as you say, Cedric, we've seen a few deals. We've seen a few public deals. We've seen a few private deals. I think there are some more challenges, because I think investors really don't, they need to, they want to mark a value, and they don't like the fact there's the uncertainty in the coupon, and therefore they tend to, in creating the value, make an assumption about an earlier margin cut than perhaps the issuer does, and then you get that sort of value dislocation. So the deals we've seen happen, and obviously there was a big European energy company where they got it away because they just offered a penalty on the downside. And they presumably offered that penalty because they were confident they would never have to incur that penalty. Did they get a better price for offering the potential step up? I don't know. I think perhaps where we might go in this market, and who knows, it's very early days, is we might see the market grow a bit where there's a sort of a more symmetry between, what the investor gets if the KPIs aren't met, and, what the issuer gets if the KPIs are met. We may see growth there, but they're more complex. My gut feel is it's very interesting. I think we'll see them. I think it will grow, but I think the traditional, if we call it vanilla green bond, will probably continue to dominate. But that's just my thoughts, Cedric.
It's important to note that the green area has been dominated by things like, as Cedric said earlier, buildings. That's been big in Singapore. That will obviously get picked up in other countries in the region, green buildings. Energy, which has been big in Thailand and Philippines. Clearly that applies everywhere in the region in terms of energy. Water investments, water infrastructure, from both reducing energy use, water consumes a lot of energy to pump it around, and for adaptation. We have seen internationally the growth of adaptation and resilience, notably the Dutch sovereign bond, which raised 6 billion euros for coastal defense and adaptation measures. So it's a good sort of example of what we might be able to do. So there's a lot of expansion in terms of types of it. If you look at the European taxonomy and the work climate bonds are doing, you'll see many other areas that could be tapped for this as people get interest in this particular market. We will be publishing social and sustainability tracking a little later this year. Jonathan, you'll be pleased to know we're starting that process. And from our perspective, this is really important in the crisis. As I mentioned earlier, we need a heightened awareness of what is involved in resilience. Measures to boost social resilience which is what social bonds are largely about, are critical to understanding resilience to climate shocks in the future, the sort of weather and more pandemics we're going to get in the future. So it's actually all one unified market from our perspective, even though the branding has gone in slightly different directions, which is fine. But from an investor's perspective, we're going to say, think of all of this as about creating societies that are future-proof. That's what it's actually about. Mitigation, resilience, the social aspects, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, are essentially indicators of more resilient societies. And that's how we'll try and knit all this together going forward. We think we're going to see a lot of growth in social and resilience and SDG issuance and loans in the region over the next couple of years. I don't think that's going to let up. Would you agree, Cedric?
Yes, and also I think there's a lot of room for further innovation in the market. You know, someone is asking whether there could be green bonds for trade finance, for example. Yep. Of course, there could be. There could be more issuance from sovereigns for sure, from SOEs, the frontier markets as well. In our report, there is a section on Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia. So there is the example of the first green loan out of Singapore for a Myanmar-based company this year. And Cambodia is also a country where there has been a first corporate bond issue, not green, but corporate. And this market is going to start to increase its diversity as well. There is more growth to come in the Islamic finance space out of Indonesia, for example. There is room for innovation, but I think in 2019, the seed have been put in the ground. You know, various currencies, various tenors, various types of issuers have come to market. So the demonstration has been made that the green bond market is diverse and can appeal to a broad range of investors. So I think that's very encouraging.
A quick question, because we're about to wrap up. Cedric, confidence in the use of proceeds is, of course, one of the underpinnings of a successful market. Tell us a bit what's happening with external reviews, which are becoming mandatory in Europe and semi-mandatory in China. What's the take-up of getting an independent review in the region?
The take-up is good. There is a lot of SPOs that are ordered.
What's an SPO?
By second-party opinion by verifiers. So this is necessary to obtain, you know, the green certification from climate bonds standard, and it's supported by all the regulators in the region as well. So that's also why the green bond appeal to more broadly to investors, is because it increases the transparency of the information that is being communicated to the investors through that third-party review of what green assets are being financed. Great.
Kunpok, questions come up. What do you want policymakers to do? ADB is doing a lot. Regulators have guidelines. What else do we want policymakers to do in the region to make sure this whole thing works and achieves public policy objectives?
Right. Thank you, Sean. Actually, what we really need to see from the policymakers is that the clear guidance or the full support from the regulators are very important. And this is already, we have already seen the ACMF through the implementation of the ASEAN Green Bond Standards. And so I think this is quite clear at the regional level. But what we need to see more is a further commitment from each national regulator to develop and to promote or to support the green bond development in their domestic capital markets. And this is something that ADB is willing to provide the support and also to facilitate the discussion among different regulators, among the private sectors, to share the experience of what they have done in their own countries and what could be done in the other countries as well.
Fantastic. We need to wrap up, guys. We're at the end of the hour. I'm looking for some parting comments from you. What does the future hold? And what would be your advice to people who've been on this call? We've had nearly 400 people actually listening in about this market and what they can do. Jonathan, let's start with you.
Well, what does the future hold? I mean, what a time to ask that question.
Yep.
Sure. We don't know, but all we can really do is sort of look at where we are, what's happened, and try and draw perhaps some sensible inferences from from that. We've clearly got the foundation. We've proved the concept around green finance. And I think Cedric has explained that very well, the diversity of markets, issuers, types, formats, currencies, tenors, you name it, it's all there, it's all doable. I think we've squashed the excuses. You know, you can't say this is complex and difficult and there's nothing in it. It's just, that's just not the case, frankly. But I think where we probably need to recognize is, of course, the immediate priority today is addressing those tragic situations where we have people who are, you know, at the very extreme are losing their lives as a consequence, and the family impacts of that, the extraordinary financial suffering that many people are going through at this time, and somehow, whilst dealing with that, be also thinking that we need to be thinking how we make sure we reduce the risk of that happening again and creating resilience, because COVID is a huge, a whopping sustainability issue. Climate is arguably even bigger, with even bigger potential impact. So, you know, when we as sort of finance people, I think thinking about, you know, wherever you sit in your, in the business, wherever you sit in financial services, whether you're managing capital, you're an intermediary, or you're a market supporter, you know, with research or consultancy, and you're doing those things, you know, we've all got to do, like scenario analysis that the regulators are telling us we have to do under TCFD. I hope that the sort of the lesson, people will no longer doubt that somehow not dealing with these issues and dealing with them later is going to be the high economic or high growth pathway. That's simply not going to be the case. And to pick a sort of a regional example from that, if you don't take it from me, go and see the government of Indonesia, go and see the planning department in Indonesia with massive challenges, and look at the work that Bappenas, the planning agency, has done around future growth trajectories. And you'll see it in their reports. And these aren't post-COVID, these are pre-COVID economic analysis. They, as many will know, they've got sort of two tiers to their Paris Agreement commitments. The higher carbon pathway is the lower growth pathway. And their analysis shows that the more they can decarbonize, the higher growth they will achieve as an economy, because they've got some sensible assumptions going into their analysis that there are real huge costs of the failure to transition, the failure to deal with these sustainability challenges early. So in a sense, and that's the same economic analysis I think we all need to be thinking about doing. And then when we put that in our own business context as an issuer, where do we want to be with our business? And then thinking about then how do we communicate that? What's a good tool to do that? Labeled financing, a great way to do that. The track record is there. And on the buy side, what are ESG strategies doing to returns? Well, the evidence is growing that they're producing better performances. So whoever you are and whatever role you play in this amazing financial act, the economy that we all live in, if you want to create value, to me, I think how you want to position yourself here is pretty obvious, but everybody's got to go out and do their own assessment on that.
Thank you, Jonathan. That's words we really need to reflect on. From ADB's perspective. Yep.
Hi, Sean.
Go ahead, Kosintr.
Okay, I'll mention from the development bank's point of view. And as ADB, of course, we are happy to support the green bond market development in our member countries. And also as the Secretariat of the Asian Bonds Market Initiative, we are happy to work with all the relevant stakeholders in ASEAN +3. And I know there might be a few industry stakeholders in the call. So if you are afraid to talk to your regulators, you can always come to us. And ADB, we can always act as an honest broker, and also to communicate your challenges to the regulators so that we can together, jointly develop the green bond market in this region. And this is not just for ASEAN, but it's for our ADB member countries as a whole. We think that experience sharing among different countries is very important, not just on green finance, but also on the local currency bond market development. So we have done some analysis on the impact of the COVID-19 under the Asian Development Outlook. And this is accessible on the ADB's website free of charge. So you may want to have a look at that. And we have some assessments on how this impact the economic growth in Asia. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you very much. Cedric, parting thoughts.
Sure. I mean, the current crisis is showing us what an external shock can do to the system, even for the most developed economies. And Asia and ASEAN in particular is very exposed to an external shock called climate change. So if I am an investor, I should ask myself, in my investments, what are the investments that prevent me from being exposed to that risk? And clearly the green bonds are providing a very sound investment for resilient projects. If I am a corporation looking to fund my business, I should also look at developing assets that are resilient. And there is a new way to finance those called the green bonds. And there is support from the wider ecosystem, from regulators, from the likes of ADB and others, from various support from philanthropic sources as well that can help the smaller issuers come to market. We have proven in 2018 and 19 that there is a strong market, the growth is there, the variety is there, many currencies can be used. So there is an opportunity as well to seize whenever a market is cheaper than another, like the Swiss franc market for a Filipino bank. So this is very encouraging, but we shouldn't forget that we are also responding to a long-term risk for which there is no clear short-term solution, unfortunately.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you to Khun Pok for representing the ADB and its pivot towards growing this market, supporting this market, and ensuring that it becomes a critical part of the future of the development of capital markets, the development of industry, the development of ASEAN. Thank you for Jonathan Drew to join us, the guru of green from HSBC, as I have dubbed him today. It's been great to be working with you, Jonathan, over these last few years. And isn't it incredible how far this market has come from those few early conversations we had so long ago? It's exciting to see. It looks like it's going to be important going forward, a critical part of the ASEAN space. While we're in the middle of this crisis, from all of us, we need to understand that addressing volatility, because climate has already given us volatility, climate change. Even at the best outcomes in terms of emissions reductions, we've got a century of extreme weather, extreme incidents, the likes we did not see last century in terms of our typhoons, floods, droughts, and pandemics. We need to understand, as we see the impact, as we're in the middle of it, that the social protection agenda, the health services agenda is a critical part, the base part, fundamental part of preparing for the future. We need to take that and grow that. And we need to make sure also that those countries that are richer support those countries that don't have the domestic resources to be able to improve their systems, to be able to better cope with the shocks of the future, because there will be no refuge for the rich in a future of extreme climate change. We're in this together. And that means globally, not just within countries. We have to support the vulnerable in society, and we need to weave that in to our green, social, and sustainable agenda going forward. And frankly, I think we will. I'm very optimistic about this. We will see a stimulus in these regions, in different countries of ASEAN, which reflects this if we get our thinking right now. So help us in this. But in the meantime, if you're a potential issuer out there or an investor, please have a look at the ASEAN report that's on the screen now. If you want further information, you can get it from the Climate Bonds website. You can get it from ADB and Note the Asia Bonds online that was on a minute ago, that website, and of course HSBC and many others. We are but 3 actors in the region. There are many people working in this. It's a movement. There are other commercial banks. HSBC is the lead underwriter, but I have to acknowledge HSBC's peers for the work they're doing as well. And of course, there are many government agencies working on this. And I just want to end with a big thank you for the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum, supported by the ADB, who really pushed this along a few years ago, and I think have given the underpinnings of this particular market. Thanks, everyone. We will attempt to answer your questions by email. You can download this particular webinar from our website and on YouTube, and a podcast version will become available in the near future. Check our website. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Until next time.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
Sean.
Thank you very much. ขอบคุณครับ